fine. But should that happen, it's good to know that Tatiana and her staff are there to help with victims assistance. They'll guide you through the process, help you if you have to testify. It's just good to know that there's somebody there to help victims. A little bit about Tatiana. She was born in Central America, immigrated to the U.S. before her 15th birthday. She attended school locally and knew that she wanted to make a difference. In my time at school, I knew I wanted to choose a career of helping others, but didn't know exactly what to do. So she worked for nonprofits, government organizations, and she settled in at the Sonoma County District Attorney's Office as the Victims Assistant Director. She currently supervises a staff of 16, that's 12 advocates, 2 restitution specialists, and an administrative assistant. What she enjoys most is the work that each time we are making a difference in someone's life. She gets to meet different individuals in our community and can build relationships, partnerships, to make someone aware that there's always a willing hand out there. So please join me in welcoming Tatiana Lopez.
Me back, everybody. This is Miranda. She does the doggy stretch. Like Gary mentioned, I have been with the DA's office for about almost going on 10 years. I started as a victim advocate, and I have Alex Perry, who's one of my senior advocates of the office, joining me. I think we wanted to be mindful that we know our conversation isn't very uplifting at times, but I do appreciate the introduction. I do come from Latin America, so I am bilingual, bicultural, and my team is composed of, I think, a wide range of backgrounds. So we'll have, an advocate that has been in the field for 5 years, where we'll have an advocate who's been in the field 25 plus years. And so our team of about 16 has definitely grown under Jill's guidance of the office. And I think what the goal of the conversation today is just so we have some information, like Gary mentioned, we are public servants, and we always want everybody to know that we are here. And our messaging is always, for whoever is going through whatever tough situation that might be going through, that we're here, and that you don't have to go through anything alone. And so a little bit about the unit, we usually don't connect with anybody unless they've been a victim of a crime. And so what that means is it could have been an identity theft, it could have been a hit and run, it could have been an elder case of physical assault. Just yesterday, I was reading over a case where a young man was walking a Safeway, and just a random guy came and punched him in the back. And you're going to the grocery store, just minding your own business, and you become a victim, right? And so those are the individuals that we work with. Like, what happens now? And so for our unit, the referrals come from law enforcement for review for the DA's attorneys to review them, and then to decide if there is a filing decision that needs to be before the judge. And then most of the time, our advocates like Alex will call them and just find out, how are you doing? What do you need? In an instance where it's a battery, right? Maybe you're still in the hospital. Maybe you have medical bills now that you can't pay. And we can provide that information. We can provide information about California victim compensation. We can provide information about maybe, it might be good to talk to someone once you're ready to process what happened to you, right? You're just going to the grocery store and you're minding your business, and now something happened to you. So that in itself can be a very traumatic event. We do have our 2 comfort dogs with us here today. Miranda, she is the seasoned dog in our office. She came to us maybe about 10 years ago, or a little less. Yeah. She kind of just runs the office now. Like Jill mentioned last time, she's like the boss. And Darla over here is her newest pup, and she is going on 2 years. June. So one more month and she'll be two. She's a COVID baby. But both of their roles is sort of like being an advocate for an four-legged version. And so I've had them sit with victims on the stand, you know, sort of like I was sitting, they'll just sit on below the podium. So if it had an opening, they'd go in. And it's just another tool that we use as advocates to give them comfort to those victims, like I said, that just weren't expecting something to happen to them. Miranda is, you know, more stubborn than Darla. Darla's more well-behaved. See, and then I give you a perfect example. She loves carrots and treats, whereas Darla knows when her time for feeding is. But like I was mentioning, with victim advocates, we will provide crisis intervention. We will provide information about the criminal justice process. We'll provide information about services, and we'll kind of just be that guidance, because the criminal justice process can be very confusing, right? So those questions that you're like, what's going to happen next? Are they going to go to the big house? Are they going to be sent to treatment? And we can answer those questions along the way. And so we're a connection between the advocate, the attorney as a team to guide the victim through a process that can be very confusing. Let me do it wrong. I'm going to pass it on to Alex so he can talk a little bit more about the dogs and fill in the gaps that I left.
Is there any feedback on this? Sorry. So, can I pass this?
Am I talking loud enough? Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
All right. So when we took on the Comfort Dog program, which has been found evidence-based to be very beneficial for certain victims, and sensitive cases, to effectively testify, to have more grounding, to reduce anxiety, to help the victim, also to help the prosecution of the bad guys. So when we took this on, we already had Miranda, who was our first go around, and she has done an excellent job, but she's kind of reached her time. She's ready to retire. And so I started working with the program PALS as Loving Support out of Forestville. I don't know if any of you guys have heard of that. It's ran by Nancy Pearson, and they have a fantastic program. They've worked really, really closely with us. So Darla's litter was born in June of 2020, and I started visiting her as a puppy. Typically how the program works for their assistance comfort dogs for courtroom situations, the dogs will remain at the facility up until about 18 months, where they're trained or live with a puppy raiser and then go through the public access test and certification, and then they are supplied to a program. But what I did is, being so close to their program, I ended up visiting with Darla when she was just born, and then after at 4 months, we started the training. So I began the regular training with her. PALS trained me to train her. And then Darla came in my home at about 6 months. So I have a rambunctious 6-year-old at home. So she's been exposed to that, desensitized to that. She's really good with children. She was just certified not too long ago. And so she has accompanied victims on the stand anywhere from some pretty serious rape cases. I don't know if you guys remember, a little while back, they had the Howard Park rape. And so she assisted that victim on the stand as she had to relive that experience and provide that testimony. She's accompanied numerous other victims on the stand. So she's doing a really good job. PALS is a great program. This is a great resource for our vulnerable people who have to come in and tell their stories.
So who in this room has been part of a jury selection or part of a jury? Okay. So I don't know if you guys have been able to see an advocate sit with a victim on the stand, but that's our role. So our role is to just be there as support, and kind of how I was telling our table, when you're in the jury box, right, you get told to just forget about who's sitting right next to the person. We're just sort of an invisible support person there. And the same goes for our dogs. And so we will use tricks, or not even tricks, we'll just use timing where, before the jury goes into the courtroom, we will go and set up the stand. So it could be maybe a comfort item. It could be as simple as a paper clip, or what I'm using right now, just, a little piece of paper to distract the mind of the individual so they can just focus on the testimony that needs to be told. And so when they're on the stand, I always come from the point of, this is your opportunity to retell the story as it happened, right? So I had a recent case where one of the defendants, I think, had gotten to the point where he had told himself that it had gone, the scenario had gone one way, which of course is complete opposite to the evidence that we have, but he's made himself believe so much that story that he actually got on the stand to testify against his other co-defendant, right? And so as an advocate, then I had to reaffirm the victim, like, I know, and everybody in that jury box knew that you were telling the truth because you know what happened during those times. And so when we were using Miranda and Darla for that story, it's sort of like a good conversation starter, right? How do you talk to someone when they've had a very traumatic event? And so you use them as a conversation starter and as a comfort, calming scenario for them before they go on the stand. And so I think, like I mentioned in my presentation, I just wanted to make a difference to that individual who unfortunately now probably had to become a victim even though they chose not to be. And so our services are available right through the whole process of the criminal justice. At time of sentencing, it doesn't mean that I'm done, right? Like I get tapped out and I'm done. It means that it's an opportunity for the victim to get conclusion with the criminal case. But a lot of the times it still means that they have a lot of work to do to be able to actually heal. It's sort of like we say, you have a scar, and just because you have the scar doesn't mean you're not gonna, that it might heal, it's gonna grow, new skin over it, but it doesn't mean it's completely gone. It still affected you. And I think one of the tools and one of the things that I always tell my victims, just because something happened to you, it doesn't mean that has to define you. And so we will, as advocates, we try to support them through a very challenging time in their lives. And we do build strong relationships that a lot of the times might be, I've never knew a professional could be there for me. I felt alone. And so I think that's one thing that we really try to say, you never have to be alone through any of the whole process. Our role, I think, is, it comes from a penal code, and there is certain rights that the victims have rights to. And so we are there to enforce those rights. We are there to support them, to help them understand. One of the things I think that I definitely would like you guys to know is that we really do take the time each time a new case comes into our office, because we know every story has a different scenario. And so no one case is ever going to be the same. And so I think one of the messages is that we're always going to be here. My team is always going to be here. My team of great advocates that I have, we all work together to make our community a better place. And I think that's the strong message that our office does try to, ensure that the community knows. Like we talked last time, there's things that are said about the DA's office and what are they doing, or how come this isn't happening, or the nixels, you wonder, right? Like, why do these people keep getting arrested? And so, we are doing the work behind the scenes, and we're trying to make a difference in our community, even though we still hear like what happens, the shootings, the sirens, I think if there is any comfort in the message that I'm trying to share here, even though it's not as positive, is there's always someone that will be there to lend a hand. So, anything to add, Alex?
No, I just want to echo the same. I mean, Tatiana and I and the other staff at Victim Services, we're public servants, you guys have a family member, a friend, or yourselves ever come across some type of victimization, there's a loss, do not hesitate to reach out. If we don't reach out first to Victim Services at the DA's office, and we're here for support, to offer resources, and that's what we're here for.
Yeah, questions?
I am wondering if, even if it's only to make trouble, has the defense attorney ever objected to the presence of one of the dogs, or is this now established procedure in California?
Great question, right? And Alex, you can definitely speak to it. But yes, defense attorneys will, it's their job, right, to protect their client or to speak on behalf of their client. And so when you see an advocate walking in with a furry four-legged dog, you're going to think, oh, so cute, right? Or, I think it was teammate over here saying, you're gone, you're gonna find you guilty no matter what what defense counsel has as a way of protecting you. And I don't think that our intention is really to provide this for the victim as a comfort. We're not trying to make a difference or an impact on the jury and change their mind or perspective of how things might have happened. And so I think, yes, we've had that issue, but I think our attorney staff is very well trained. I like what Alex mentioned. There is evidence-based information that basically knows and proves that we can have this individual, this human, this animal that can support this individual through the process. And so, you want to talk a little bit?
And just not only that, to answer your question, there's also existing case law and precedent that the DA is able to provide to the judge, that we can have that animal there over an objection. It works most of the time. Typically where you see the objection is at a jury trial. So when we have the other preliminary hearings or other hearings where evidence could be presented, less objections.
No, I would think it would be solely the jury.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I know Alex has a couple cases, and other advocates have seen, especially kids, right? If you're a 5-year-old and you have to get on the stand like an adult, that's not something that you really look forward to, right? It's not something like, oh, I'm gonna go to the park, right? You're going to court and now you're having to retell your story. And so that's where we bring in these two, to give them an opportunity to take their mind off of whatever they're gonna have to say behind that podium. And so, we really do utilize them to help them heal. And I mean, while we were leaving, Miranda picks up on cues. And so, if I'm having a bad day, she'll come to my office. If she's, an attorney's having a bad day, we'll go and kind of socialize. And so she is our social butterfly. Even, with the work that we do can be very hard. And so they can be there for us as well. And even like Alex mentioned, when you see them out walking up and about in the court, people within the court know who they are. And so they've built a relationship and they're very well known in the building. Any other questions? Yes.
Because your department the one that determines the amount of money that's paid out to victims at times?
We work with California Victim Compensation. And so we will process the claim for a victim and we'll work with the state. It's actually a state funded program. And so the eligibility gets determined based on the state's guidelines. And so we'll work with them. And so I was just telling Alex that a couple of years back, we used to have a local claims unit here. And then we, before COVID, had downsizing and staffing. And so now our claims are all going through Sacramento. And so, because of COVID, things have changed, sometimes for the worse. And so sort of like I mentioned, my role is to mend those relationships. Hey, what's happening with this? What is it that we're missing in order to be able to process? And so our role as advocates is to advocate on behalf of the victims so that they can get that assistance that they need, whether it be lost wages, whether it be assistance with counseling, or relocation, or, as something as little as maybe a Ring camera, right? Because now you can get a Ring camera and that can be part of your security system. And so we will advocate on their behalf with the state so they don't have to go through the process alone, because it can be also very confusing. It's like an insurance claim. Like, that doesn't make any sense. I just paid you all this money. Why can't you just cover my car? And so it's the same way with victim compensation. Want to speak anything else?
The only thing I would just add to that is, the state's solely at the discretion of figuring out what the payout will be to reimburse for losses, crime victimization losses. But for our role, we're actually authorized with the state to help the victims identify their losses, obtain documentation, and then be an authorized representative. If the state's going to turn them down, they have an appeal process, and we can assist with that.
Will you go to the victim's house and console them and give them spiritual guidance or emotional support, things like that? You really get involved with them personally?
Yeah, so there, especially right now because of COVID, we've been very sensitive, right? We have vulnerable populations that we work with. They might be homebound or they just might not be ready to be out and about like the rest of us. And so there are times where the advocates will go out with the attorney and an investigator for safety to go do a home visit whether it be at the time of a preliminary hearing, or it could be as it's getting near jury trial, so we can provide information. We had been mindful, again, because of health, we would do Zoom meetings if that was a preferred way of meeting, or we would meet them at a park or at a Starbucks. But we do try to do that and accommodate as much as we can. Do you want to speak to a case maybe?
Well, what I'll just say on that is, especially at the onset of a crime, especially when you're dealing with sometimes vulnerable populations, vulnerable people, and it's difficult to make contact. And, we could go to the home. We may do that upfront crisis counseling within our role, but then what we really try to do is connect those individuals with ongoing supports. So example, counseling. We try to get them connected to a good match through counseling, so they have that person that can help them after the case is gone.
So, I'm not an attorney, but these are criminal cases, right? Generally.
Correct.
Other than actual damages, is there such a thing as pain and suffering, or do you have to take that to civil court?
Yeah, so great question. We are under the district attorney's office, so we do work for the people. But our role is more related to the criminal justice process. And sort of like what Alex was mentioning, if there is something where we don't know, like we're not counselors, right? Then maybe if you need an additional counseling session, because maybe you just lost someone and you need grief counseling, then we know who to direct you to if that's a need. But for example, pain and suffering, I think I had I don't know if it was a farmer, but he was raising goats and off of Stony Point Road. And it was like every other weekend, like drunk drivers will just crash into his fence. And so it's like, well, now I'm at a loss because now my goats are, the water system that gives them the water and the food is broken because this person just broke into my fence again, and I'm having to go through insurance. So there's times where we will try to make them whole through the criminal justice process through restitution, but there's also times where you as an individual have the right to go the civil route, file a civil suit, or go after the individual for whatever insurance coverage they might have had. And so we usually are very clear with expectations when we talk to an individual like that, because they do have the right to restitution. But we will tell them, that question is more for maybe a civil attorney, because again, we're not attorneys, but we get so many years in the field, we get to hear and learn about the processes that they might need to go through.
And just to add specifically on pain and suffering, that is not applicable under in the criminal court's restitution unless it has to do with sex crime against a minor. There is some existing case law that allows for that in the restitution process.
The victims' compensation program is administered by the state. They determine the payout. Is that based on the severity of the crime, or do they have a cap?
Yes, great question. So yes, it does go through their main office is in Sacramento, and they're very connected with most all divisions in the state of California, Victim Services Division. So our division is under the DA's office, but not all Victim Services Division tends to be under the district attorney's office. And so they have set specific caps on what they will pay out. For example, I think funeral expenses is about $7,000, right? Whereas relocation, it used to be $3,000 or $2,000. It used to be $2,000. Who moves with $2,000? No one, right? And so we would have, I remember I had a victim of a sexual assault that needed to move they moved to a different town in our county, and it was like $10,000 of moving costs, right? And so then we worked with the state because that was a different cap, and they were able to make a one-time exception to approve her additional expenses because there were reasonable. And so that's sort of what we will try to work with the state and help out the victim, because we don't want them to be out $8,000 for having to move as a reason of safety. And so there are certain caps, and I was telling Alex that the state program is realizing, right, that we live in one of the most expensive states, and so they're trying to revisit those caps. Funeral burial expenses, $7,000 is not a lot, and so they're trying to up that cap. And so they have to go through the process and legislature to be able to change that, to be more reasonable about it. Like counseling, that's another one that they're trying to change, because most providers aren't gonna just charge you $75 for a session. Right now, they're charging $150, depending on if you have a specialty or not. Yeah.
So is that taxpayer money or does it go after the fellows?
So great, that's a great question. So what pays this pot of money? The vast majority of it is the general restitution fine that anybody convicted of a crime in California gets slapped with. And so that feeds the pot. And up until recently, it had been pretty well funded. Right now, I think they're trying to figure that out.
Any other questions? You can keep, oh, there.
Yes, if the victim already has an attorney, are you still willing to assist the victim?
Yes, so there are times where a victim will go and hire a Marcy's attorney. And if the victim is already working with an attorney, that the attorney's role is then to do our job. You want to speak to that?
Yeah, what we'll do is we'll act and help ensure that a victim's rights are, that the victim is informed and aware of their rights under the California Constitution. If a victim goes out and hires an attorney to help ensure that, that's called a Marcy's attorney, it's under Marcy's law. What we'll do is we'll make contact with that attorney to see what type of role and participation they're going to play, what kind of contact they want from our office, and we'll just facilitate that.
So one of the things that I wanted to mention, I kind of mentioned last time that we came with Jill, we try to be out in the community, right? If you've never had someone that's been a victim of crime, you wouldn't know about us. But if you have, you might have gone through the process alone, and we really don't want that to be the case. And so we do try to be out in the community. The next event where we will be out will be at the Senior Fair, Senior Expo, which is at the Finley Center on June 9th. And so June is an awareness month for elder abuse. And so we want to bring awareness that we are here to help, and that there is usually someone that can be there to listen to whatever might be happening at home, in any tough situation. And so you might see Miranda or Darla or one of our advocates out there. And so if ever, just come say hi. And we usually have a lot of swag, which I did bring Miranda and Darla stuffed animals. And so we do try to provide information and just let everybody know that we can be here if they need us to be there. All right, thank you so much for the time.
Thank you, Tatiana and Alex, for a great presentation, and I'd like to present you with a certificate of appreciation, which is a worth a lot of money.
Thank you.